What's up, everyone? Vinny Muso from Muso Athletics here for day 14 of our 30 days of force. Still talking about our second 10-day cycle, our force redirection principles. So today we're going to talk about redirections. And what redirections are is we can think of them as a building off from our oscillations. If you remember in yesterday's video, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, I suggest taking a look to kind of get, an idea more in detail of what oscillations are. But to quickly review them, oscillations are essentially working, turning our muscles off and then back on, which is a very, very key aspect of developing our overall athleticism. So we talked about, oscillation movements where you almost kind of turn your muscles off and almost kind of go limp like a rag doll, kind of drop down to the floor and then quickly turn the muscles back on, recover, and then move through a certain range of motion. Okay, so that's just kind of a quick review of our oscillations. But again, if you didn't see yesterday's video, I suggest going back and taking a look at it. But one of the main differences between our oscillations and our redirections is the concept of overload. So we've talked about progressive overload and what that concept is. And for our redirections, the thing that separates it from our oscillations is that for our redirections, we are really trying to overload. So what I mean by that, when we talked about our oscillations yesterday, we talked about turning the muscles, off. Where you're kind of just almost in like a brief split second free fall before you turn your muscles back on and then recover again. Our redirections are different, where we're not thinking about kind of going limp or turning our muscles off and dropping towards the ground. We're trying to overload and really, we can think of attacking the ground. So, one of the most basic example of a redirection exercise is a counter movement jump. So, counter movement jump, also known as just a vertical jump. So you start the arms overhead, pull yourself down to the ground, and then jump up as high as you can. That is, the easiest way to, kind of give an example of what a redirection exercise is like. So the difference between that and something like an oscillating, drop squat is in that, oscillation movement in a drop squat, we're not actively pulling ourselves down to the ground. Again, we're just turning the muscles off and then quickly reacting to that and then recovering. Whereas in our redirection movements, we're trying to essentially combine our force absorption with a force direction exercise. So again, we're attacking the ground. We're trying to generate as much force going down or laterally, whatever direction you're working on. But we're trying to generate as much force that we have to absorb and then quickly change directions of. So that overload concept in our redirections, that we're trying to increase the amount of force that we have to absorb. Whereas opposed to when we were talking about force absorption, we just talked about how quickly can we absorb that force. Our redirections and our force redirection is not only how much force can we absorb, but how quickly can we, absorb it and then switch directions and produce force. So that's the main difference between our redirections and our oscillations, with our redirections being more about overload, trying to create more force that your body has to absorb before it redirects it and switches directions. Okay, so that's the main difference. We talked about that concept of attacking the ground. Again, that's that standing vertical jump or that counter movement jump. Really thinking about attacking the ground, trying to pull yourself down to the ground as quick and as hard as you can before in a split second catching, redirecting, and then going back up, for a vertical jump or vertical movement. So we're attacking the ground, and then we're also trying to, essentially work with maximal force, where our oscillations, we still want to generate a lot of force, but our oscillations were more about speed, so turning the muscles off, and then how quickly can we turn them back on. Our redirections are really about maximal force. So again, that vertical jump, we're trying to generate as much force as we can going down and as much force as we can going back up. Okay, so that's the main difference, another big difference between our redirections and our oscillations. Where the oscillations, we were kind of working within a set range of motion, and we're not really doing truly maximal force in our oscillations, because if we look at something like our drop squat, if we really were generating maximal force, we're going to jump, okay, whereas opposed to just kind of going up and down, bouncing in that movement, where our oscillations are. And then our redirections are all about, again, how much force can I produce that I have to absorb, then I have to change, quickly absorb it, redirect it, and then change directions. So we're really dealing with maximal force in our redirections, okay? And just some examples. Again, these are probably when we're talking about exercises that we've seen in the strength and conditioning world, or even a rehab world, when dealing with maybe more particularly with athletes who are rehabbing to get back to their sport. These are probably more the concept, and we see more exercises more commonly than we see something like isometrics or oscillations or max isos, which we'll talk about tomorrow. But our counter movements, so our counter movement jump, okay, which we talked about a couple minutes ago in the video. So essentially just your standing vertical jump, okay, you're standing, athletic position, swing the arms up, come up on the toes, you're aggressively and violently pulling yourself down, and quickly redirecting that, and then jumping up as high as you can, okay, and that can be done multiple ways. It can be done with two legs. Again, we're just on two legs, pull yourself down, jump up as high as you can. It could be done with one leg. We stand on one leg, come up, pull ourselves down, and then jump off of that one leg. Okay, so those are our counter movements. And some exercises that we can think about. Our depth movements are another one. So in our force absorption part of this series, we had a day where we were talking about rate of force development with some examples. So if you remember our depth drops, where we're standing on a box and we step off and we just stick our landing, and we're focusing on sticking our landing as quickly as we can. So our depth movements are kind of building off of that, whereas opposed to in the force absorption, we just stepped off that box or that bench or whatever we're standing on and stuck the landing. Now what we're trying to do is we are stepping off, hitting the ground, and then jumping back up as high as we can. Okay, so as opposed to just sticking the landing, we're now, as soon as we hit the ground as quickly as we can, we're trying to, again, absorb force quick and then redirect it back up. Okay, and that's, again, another example of how we're really working with maximal force and overload with our redirections, okay, because we can overload that movement, like a depth movement, where maybe we started at like an 18-inch box where we were just stepping off and sticking the landing, and then maybe as we get better at that, we progress to a 24-inch box, and now after we've worked on absorbing force and sticking the landing, now we hit the ground and jump back up. Okay, so that's kind of how we overload an exercise like that. We can increase the height of something that we're stepping off of. For our counter movements, we can add some weight. So I'm not a huge fan. I know I've seen a lot of people doing weighted jumps where they have a barbell on their back, and they're essentially doing counter movement jumps. So they're pulling themselves down and then jumping up with that weight on their back. Not a huge fan of that, just because I don't like loading the spine and having all that weight coming down on the spine. But there's definitely ways that we can, kind of overload our counter movements. If you have access to a weighted vest or a weighted belt, or even, wearing a backpack with some weight on it, not going to strain or stress the spine as much as if we were jumping with a barbell on our back. If you have access to dumbbells, you can hold those dumbbells at the side. Obviously, you're not going to be able to pull yourselves down with your hands, but you can still think about aggressively pulling yourself down with your legs before you go up into that jump. So if you have access to dumbbells, that's how we can overload that. You have access to a trap bar, the bar that you stand in to do deadlifts in. Same thing, you can load up some weight on that, stand in the bar, and work on your counter movement jumps, overloading in that fashion. Okay, so we have our counter movements, we have our depth movements, and then our change of direction or our agility training really falls under this category of redirections. So your hurdle work, I know a very popular exercise is lateral skaters, where you have a hurdle that you're essentially jumping laterally side to side over, pushing off one leg. That's an example of our change of direction movement. Again, really focusing on redirecting our force. Again, really emphasizing that quick absorption, change of direction, producing force in the opposite direction that we absorbed it in. Okay, so that's our day 14. That's our redirections. Again, just to kind of quickly review and summarize. Our redirections are building off of our oscillations, with some main differences being that we are now overloading our redirections, where oscillations were more about turning the muscles on and how quickly can we turn them back on. Our redirections are more how much force can I make myself absorb and then quickly have to absorb and change directions. Okay, so we can do that with overload by holding weight, increasing the height of something that we step off of before we jump, things like that. Okay, so attached to this video, we'll see a couple exercises. Just kind of going over these some of these methods of training redirection. Take a look at the videos at the end. Tomorrow we will talk about maximal or max isos, or overcoming isometric is another term that's used to describe this method, and we'll go more into detail about that. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and if you haven't yet, take a look at Amuso Athletics on Instagram for more training content. See you tomorrow.